Welcome back, everybody. My name is Gecko Lacau, and this is Man Bites Retro. And what we do here, every week there's a new voice that brings forward their favorite person in film history, and we present that voice to you. So please stay tuned for the show. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Man Bites Retro, and today we're doing something a little bit different. You know how we always mention that we're going to be discussing characters in film history, directors, movies, etc. Well, today we are actually doing one of the most iconic characters in film history, and actually literature as well, I think, because honestly, this character delves through many different medias, and this is Darth Vader. And obviously, I have two amazing guests with me today. The first one that I want to introduce is the nerdychap.
Hello, everyone. I'm the nerdychap, ordained minister who loves all things sci-fi, local personality who likes to give a sarcastic and comedic spin on my reviews. And we are discussing my favorite character from Star Wars. That's right, Darth Vader. Oh, this is a good time. Good times.
And of course, I got the amazing personality as well from diversely-geek, Jody.
Hey, yeah, it's Joe from diversely-geek. Just here to give my 2 cents on what was one of my favorite characters growing up, actually, that I related very heavily to. So, yeah, and I'm here, and you can always find me at diversely-geek on all social media outlets.
Awesome. And let's go right into it. I want to give a little quim and a little subject matter that we're going to delve into.
Hey, Louis.
Oh, and we actually got Nisha from diversely-geek. Your geek mom is on board as well.
Yes, I am. A little bit of technical difficulty for a moment there, but I'm on.
Awesome. Great. So actually, you jumped perfectly in. We're just doing the introduction. So we're now going to delve into a little bit of the history and the motive behind Anakin Skywalker and the later Darth Vader, because there's a lot to go into in this character, and we want to concentrate now on the psychology of it. How fear is the turning force to the dark side, and why Darth Vader is the personification of fear and the dark side in the Star Wars universe, at least for the movies, that is, of course. So, Nerdy Chap, let's start off with you since...
Alrighty. So, talking about the origin of Vader. So we're going to have to go into episode 1. I know for some Star Wars fans, they're like, no, the prequels, jump out window. But if you really take the time to watch the prequels actually have a lot in them that makes them really good to worth watching. So let's go into Vader's origin, things that people don't tend to see. Vader, as you know, when Anakin is first brought before the Jedi Council, they talk about the fear of his mother. They're like going, your thoughts dwell on your mom and all. And he's like, yes, I'm concerned. And they said, are you afraid of her? And, fear, because they're talking about how fear of loss is important. And Anakin's kind of like, I don't see why this is a big deal. And they're like, oh, it's a very big deal, because then you get that wonderful line, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hatred, hatred leads to suffering. Yeah. The path of the dark side. So Anakin is very afraid of loss as the main issue. So let's kind of even go earlier than that pivotal moment. That is, Anakin Skywalker himself was a slave. He was originally owned by Gardula the Hutt, him and his mother. And one of his first concepts of also the idea of death is that, as he explains to Padme and to Qui-Gon when they first meet him in episode 1, is that if they try to run, or they try to rebel, they have little explosives inside them that their owner can just click a button and boom, they die. So Anakin's already been brought up with this concept of being afraid of dying by means of random explosion. You then, when he does have his moment of that Qui-Gon gets him freed and brings him to the Jedi Temple, he has that whole sad moment where he comes to realize that his mom isn't joining him. And he doesn't want to leave because he doesn't want to leave his mom. But his mom encourages him that a greater opportunity has been opened up for him. This is a chance to be a Jedi. And Anakin has dreamed, if you've taken the time to read the books, the novelization of the movies, that Anakin has dreamed of wanting to come back as a Jedi to free slaves like him. Fortunately,
even in the movie,
as we
touch on it a little bit.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, as we come to know in later terms, this is going to become very ironic because Vader goes from being the person who wants to free slaves to the person who's going to have to turn a blind eye to the idea of slave labor being used to make the Death Star. So that's going to mess with him. But so Anakin leaves his mother, and I want to bring back also one of the key things that he says to Qui-Gon when he first meets him. And that is that table scene. He's already met him, but when he's at that table and he sees the laser sword, he's like, only Jedi pack those kind of weapons and all. And Qui-Gon's like, well, what if I took it off a Jedi and everything? He died and I just took it off his body. And Anakin's like, that's not possible because Jedi can't die. Because Anakin's already naive in the world of not, I guess, seeing major death in front of him. And Qui-Gon's like, I wish that was true. Well, what is the first death that Anakin sees in his young life? The funeral of Qui-Gon Jinn. And you got to think, this is an 8-year-old child brought before a funeral service in which they're roasting Qui-Gon over open fire because funeral pyre rites are part of the Jedi mourning and funeral ceremony. And you got to think that this leaves an indelible print on Anakin. Maybe in some sense, his fear of loss and fear of death, now he's encountering definitely his first death and sees it probably frightening in some capacity, is what motivates him to try and then gain the power over death. Because Anakin himself is trying to pursue power within the Jedi Order to become the strongest and greatest Jedi ever. And when he feels he's failed his mother in Episode 2 in Attack of the Clones, when his mom dies after being tortured by the Sand People, he sees it as a failure. He doesn't see that only the Sand People are to blame. He sees that as a failure on his own part, that he wasn't there soon enough, that he could have done something. If he had more power, he could have saved her life, which then that anger, guilt, regret turns itself into him not only attacking the Sand People who are responsible, but everyone, women and children included, because he dehumanizes them and sees them as more of vermin that need to be eradicated.
But not only that, on a psychological level, killing somebody is the ultimate fear of death, because it's his way of actually allowing himself to have some form of control over death. And by doing that, he takes control of death. And he gets that first inkling of control over death, which is what he's seeked his whole life. And now he's finally getting a taste of it for the first time.
Yeah, like that.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to chime in on that, so go ahead, Joe. I was just going to say, like, for me, I was between 9 to maybe 11 years old at the time of Episode 1 and actually at the time of Episode 2. And I just remember, I always think back and I'm like, why was Anakin one of my favorite characters ever growing up? Because it's a really dark character. And I think it was because of that sense of guilt and longing to have it. I'd say it became him striving for power, but it was because he wanted to change the way that things were. He wanted to save people. Ultimately, his driving goal was to save his mother that was lost, to save these people that were lost. And it's honestly the most tragic and traumatic existence, in my opinion, of, I think, a Star Wars character that we really see the entire life of.
And villains in general. I mean, honestly, villains, they don't start off as villains. Their perfect personification of that is Unbreakable, where the Glass character, he's just a person, and he's trying to help people, and then he gets turned into a villain by somebody else that doesn't agree with his point of view. So it goes back to Darth Vader is not a villain at this point in time. He's doing what he thinks is right, and by seeking vengeance and tearing apart these these people because they did what they did to his mom. So at this point in time, I don't consider him a villain yet. It's when he starts committing the atrocities later on in the other films. But at this point in time, he's still not a villain. And that's where I want to go into detail on, is where do you see, where was that point where he became from a hero to a villain? And I think that's...
So can I jump in?
Yeah.
Because before you move on to the next point, I kind of want you guys to take a
So, I mean, I am coming in, I guess, a little bit as your resident spice expert. So there's a couple of things I want to bring out and bring to light here. I don't believe that Anakin is acting out of fear, actually. There is a level of fear that's built into him. There's not malevolent fear. There's lack of confidence fear. There's a lack of stability fear. There's a lack of identity. And so therefore there's conflict, because Anakin doesn't have a father. He's a spiritually created being. And that has always been a point of difficulty for him, the fact that he didn't actually have a father. If you do remember, he did go through bullying as a child, having only a single mother. His mother went through bullying, being enslaved because she didn't have a husband and she didn't have someone to support her. So we need to go back to the core and the crux of what created the fear that you're discussing. Because fear goes in a myriad of pathways. Okay, it's like a cascading waterfall. It starts somewhere, but then it has trickle downs that just can splay out 1,000 different directions. And I believe that's what happened to Anakin. He has a loss of stability. There is no understanding of his existence. He's born questioning, continues to question, and lives a life of enslavement and entrapment. I believe entrapment and the inability to control his own environment, his own actions and his own circumstances, and therefore to be able to save his mom at any point in his life, which he always wants to do, is his leading fundamental core behind the fear that you're discussing. And when he does kill the Sand People, it's because in that moment as a Jedi, he actually has come, as a Padawan, he has finally come to some understanding and some connection with his Force entity and the ability to master that, remove that, and manipulate that. And in this moment of vengeance, what Anakin has is the ability to take control for the first time in his life. Because up until this moment, he has still built, yes, master, yes, mom, yes, master, because of this enslavement mentality. And even as in his training, in a sense, he goes from an enslaved mentality to being in a fully controlled mentality, because he's following the lead of a master. I am going to just say to you that those things all create a level of trauma and PTSD that then lead to his absolute psychotic break. Because when he massacres the Sand People, it's a psychotic break. Where in this moment, he's like, I have to take control. I am taking control. This is it. This is my moment to seize that. And you do know in the movie and in the books, he changes after that. So there you go. You guys go now.
Not to mention, he goes from being a slave to being in a Padawan under the Jedi, control of the Jedi Order, and then he goes to being under the control of Palpatine.
But one could actually debate, is he under the control of Palpatine already when he goes to kill the Sand people? Because he's already being advised by him, and he's kind of being taken under the wing of Palpatine.
No, I'm not debating that. I'm 100% saying yes. I just didn't bring it in that moment because we were referencing what you guys were discussing. But I just wanted to kind of say, hey, fear has so many different faces to it, and we need to look at it from all those angles when it comes to him, because the fear you're referencing is not the kind of a person who's hiding from someone who's breaking into their home, or a person who has levels of mental phobia. This is a fear of a child who's in a locked-in situation, an abusive situation, in an absolutely state of desolation and loss of any identity up until this point. So I'm looking at it from that point of view. Okay, go. Sorry.
One could argue that he still doesn't have an identity. I want to name one point in time where Anakin is actually Anakin and not Darth Vader, or the character that becomes Darth Vader, because he never has a moment of freedom, really. Even this moment that we're talking about right now, he was manipulated by Palpatine already at this point, to allow his fear, allow his hatred to bubble up, and allow this atrocity to be committed. Because Palpatine gave him the okay. He said, yes, that's okay to do at this point. So he never really has free will. And I think that's what creates the villain, one of the greatest villains, is because he never had any free will until the very end of the series.
Yeah, Palpatine is giving him a false identity, a false sense of security in his ability to exercise free will. But in the entire time, he's manipulating that, his Anakin's understanding, perception, perspective on what it is to have free will. So, okay.
Well, here's one thing. As far as Palpatine influencing Vader or influencing Anakin, there is a comic, I just don't remember all the details. There is Anakin and Obi-Wan, which is a Marvel comic that came out as part of adding to the new canon lore, that takes place in between episode 1 and episode 2, where Anakin, at a very early age, actually thought about leaving the Jedi Order, but is convinced by Obi-Wan, but also by Palpatine taking him down to the darker corridors of Coruscant, some of the bars and things, and Palpatine trying to teach him a little lesson here or there, that you see that Palpatine has been an influence on Anakin at a very, very early age and very early stage. The main thing of Palpatine's influence on Anakin is, since he's a slave, he's considered to be a nobody, and Palpatine keeps fueling him with a sense of pride, not self-esteem, pride, of constantly letting him know, like, oh, well, you are the best, you are the greatest after all. I don't see why the Jedi don't use you more often. You are truly their greatest warrior, To try and always keep puffing up Anakin, because he knows that when you have pride, there comes a fall. And so he keeps constantly, so as the Jedi are actually tearing down his pride to make him a person who's not as selfish or self-centered, Palpatine is doing the exact opposite. He's constantly going, oh, well, they reprimanded you? How dare they even do that? You are far smarter than them, but I can understand it is the Jedi way, But that seems so wrong. So,
literally leading him down a path to create a false identity. Literally, he's imposing this entire sense of self on Anakin that is not him. But because he understood that Anakin needed to feel confident, that he needed to feel powerful, that he needed to be able to say, I have the power to then now manipulate my own destiny. And that word was used by Palpatine a lot.
Yeah.
Your destiny,
oh yeah.
Your destiny. So yeah.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is, as later stories go, like in comics and books and things, because you don't see it so much in the movies, but you definitely see it in any comic book written about Darth Vader, any book that's written about Darth Vader, that Palpatine's main use of manipulation when Vader is Vader is, you're not special, I can replace you in a heartbeat, which is why he brings up all these other people that he goes like, oh, well, this will be my new apprentice that Vader ultimately ends up destroying or something. And then Vader's like, well, how do you feel about that now? Are you going to replace me? He's like, oh, no, see, Anakin, I was just using that as a test to show why you're strong and all. But never forget your place. He's like, okay. So Palpatine always constantly messes with Vader by going, oh, you think you're special, once he has Vader under his power, by constantly throwing in new usurpers that he's like, oh no, I can replace you. You're easily replaceable. Just as I replaced Maul with Dooku and I replaced Dooku with you, yeah, I can replace you. You're not that great.
And Vader sees that.
Yeah.
Anakin sees that in his lifespan. He sees him go through these two apprentices, so he has that fear of abandonment because of past, honestly, trauma. Because it goes back to what Nisha was saying. This is a highly traumatized kid from the beginning, and he goes through major PTSD and suffers through PTSD all the way to the end. I mean.
Oh yeah, well the key scene for Vader. Sorry to jump in on here, but I want to say this: the key scene for Vader, where you see the inklings of him going to be trajectorying towards the dark side, is when he's there. First of all, explaining to Padme that he killed the Sand People, not just the men, but the women and the children. Which, honestly, any woman naturally hearing that should have been bolting. but apparently, because Padme loves him so much, she decides to go, well, it's natural to be angry and want to control things, and I understand your grief, but this is where people have put in the fan theory of, was Anakin's force powers using force mind control over her? That's why she didn't bolt on him. And it's a fun theory, but unfortunately, as of right now, we don't know that is the true context. All we know, basically it's more of that.
I'm also very hard to believe that Padme, being who she is, would have accepted what he did and have cradled and consoled him the way that she does. Still a very fetch thing for me, but cool.
But the other key scene is when he's there at the grave of his mother. And his words, that's where you see he's going to be led to the dark side, is when he says, I wasn't strong enough for you, Mother. And I promise I will become strong enough. I will even gain the power over death. That's the thing.
Yep.
His fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of death, fear of failure, all these fears is what sends Anakin moving towards the dark side, which we see in episode 3. But you start to even see some stuff if anyone takes the time to watch Star Wars: The Clone Wars. And that's moments where Anakin's doing well, but he's still constantly rebelling against Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's doing the aspirated, Anakin, oh my gosh, Anakin. Getting after him. But there's a whole cartoon episode where Anakin sees Padme's former lover, former boyfriend, that she has no interest in anymore. But since he sees this guy looking like he's trying to make moves on her, he flips out. His jealousy comes out, and they're like, they take the blows to each other. And Padme is like, "Stop! What are you doing?" He almost ends up losing Padme over his own sense of jealousy in that time. But he's able to, woo her back. But there are moments like that. He crosses the line when during an interrogation of the Geonosian, I think it's like, I'm trying to remember his name, Poggle the First or something. He force chokes him as part of the interrogation. which is supposed to be against the Jedi way, but he force chokes him because he needs to find out that information. You have another line in the cartoon series where like the guy is going like, whoever, if you were to kill me, this guy is saying it to Obi-Wan, if you were to kill me, you will be a murderer, and that's not the Jedi way. And all of a sudden a lightsaber goes through him, and it's Anakin. He's like, hey, I got this. And so there's all these little moments throughout the Clone Wars cartoon series where you see Anakin's got this rebellious dark side edge to him constantly. And then let's get into this part. Betrayal and lack of trust. Mm-hmm. Because you see it in episode 3 when he feels that he's already going to be being dishonest when Palpatine kind of asks him to be a personal representative on the Jedi Council for him, and the Jedi go like, well, we'll decide to use that as a means of him spying on Chancellor Palpatine. And he's like, well, I don't want to spy. Now I don't know where my loyalty is. He doesn't know who to trust. But that's even earlier in Clone Wars cartoon series. You have this whole undercover sequence with Obi-Wan Kenobi fakes his death against the bounty hunter Reiko Hardeen. They capture him. Obi-Wan now goes undercover as Reiko, and Anakin's not told. He actually has to witness a funeral that the Jedi put on to try and make it convincing that Obi-Wan died, that same funeral pyre thing, and this ticks off Anakin to where he chases after Reiko and almost ends up killing Obi-Wan because he thinks he's going after the man responsible for killing Obi-Wan until it's revealed to him what is the real truth. And then he's like, well, how can I trust the Jedi? And then also what happens to his favorite Padawan, and I'll allow definitely Nisha and Jody to take over on this because I'm bringing up a fan fave, Ahsoka. What happens to Ahsoka also shows that lack of trust in the Jedi Order.
I was just going to kind of bring it back a little bit to when you guys were mentioning, Palpatine and having that influence, that he had that influence, and we see it throughout the Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. And that if we really look at things, like Obi-Wan has always considered himself more of that brotherly relationship to Anakin. Mm-hmm. And so going back to how Nisha Miyuki-kun was mentioning that Anakin had that lack of a, say, quote unquote, like father figure, and how at first that ended up kind of being Qui-Gon, and then, well, he died. And then mm-hmm. I think that in Palpatine, obviously saw that insecurity and stepped in that role, and that's why Anakin had such a hard time being disloyal to Palpatine, because he kind of did see him in a way as this person that was supportive and constantly like boosted his confidence, and that it was all manipulation. But at the end of the day, that's Palpatine kind of stepped in that role, and I think that's why, jumping to the end, the only thing that was able to actually bring him back slightly was the fact that he had to actually accept that, oh wait, this is like my son. Oh, and I'm a mm-hmm. father. Oh wait, no, I can't actually let this happen. And I think like that's kind of an underlying theme. Obviously his name Vader is, we all know father, and so it's like, I think a kind of really small underlying theme that they put through there. And you had mentioned that Palpatine had promised him, or rather that he wanted this power over death. That's what he basically kind of mentioned mm-hmm. at his mom, when his mom died, and that's what Palpatine promises him, and that's why ultimately he, like with Padme specifically, that's why there was that major switch, because it was ultimately that being guaranteed this power over death, and he at that point was just completely. This is why I could never see Anakin as a villain. I just saw it was just always so sad to me, because he was just completely manipulated his entire life.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct. You're so right. For the midichlorians all the way up, I don't feel that he's. The thing is when you look at the way that Palpatine inculcated and basically groomed his Sith masters, the Sith lords, he always used a sense of what's called negative
reinforcement, right? It's almost like Pavlov's dog. I'll stroke your head if you go do this for me. You'll get a treat if you do this for me. And always remember, you're first. You're first. You're my most important. And you know that because you see that throughout the entire series, that he's fueling their sense of lack of confidence and lack of self-value. And the entire story of Anakin is a sense of never finding his own value. And I'm going to jump really far ahead to Luke. And I think the reason he was able to connect to Luke ultimately is because Luke said, but I value you. I value you. I know you haven't been here for me. I know you've hurt me. I know you've hurt Leia. I know you've hurt our mom, but I still value you. Now you need to value yourself and believe that there's good in you. Because somewhere along the line, somehow, all through the Clone Wars, through everything that you've done, you've never truly accepted that you are good and that you're valued and that you have worth. Otherwise, you would not have been seeking to constantly prove yourself, and improving yourself harm so many. Does that kind of make sense? So,
I think.
Well, I was going to.
I want to go into a little bit on that one, actually.
Okay.
I think. I think some of the concepts of Luke and Darth Vader. I don't think Darth Vader becomes like Anakin again until the very end, where Luke is willing to sacrifice himself, willing to give up this fear of death, and that's when Anakin is finally able to notice, oh, I don't need to be a fear of death. I don't have to have this fear of death. Going back to the first point that made him a Sith, he had a fear of death. What happens when you lose that fear of death to help your own son because you don't want him to go down the same path that you did? And that's where he realizes finally, I don't want this. I don't want to have this fear of death. And he overcomes that fear of death. And that's...
I don't really see it as a fear of death. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I do, because that's what his underlying theme is. His fear of death of Padme. That's what sets him in motion.
It's lost. It's always going to be this absolute fear of loss of connection, loss of self-value, and loss of being, of the love that he has. It's a little bit different. He's not fearing death itself. He'll die. He goes into battles. We watched everything. We know that he's pretty reckless. It's not that. It's the fear of losing the beings that he loves, who he feels his stability to, he feels his value to. That's. I'm a mom, so I guess in my head, kind of I see it from perspective, and as a psych professional, that's kind of where I'm seeing it from. But go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, Nerdy Chap.
Well, this is what I was going to say. Since we jumped way ahead there, I want to pull back because the reason why I brought up the Clone Wars stuff is that I was going in chronological order: Episode 1, Episode 2, Clone Wars, and eventually into Episode 3. Because yes, Episode 3 is where Anakin does get the ultimate temptation. And George Lucas himself said that he wanted that scene to be like, this is as if the devil is offered, seen by Palpatine acting as Satan, tempting Anakin with the very thing that Anakin wants, because he's already been having these nightmares that he's going to lose Padme during childbirth. And he's trying to prevent that. And it kind of goes down that whole thing of that which you try to prevent, you end up making the pass because his whole thing to trying to stop this dream from becoming a reality is what actually makes it a reality. And Palpatine does tempt him with that. It's like he tells him about Darth Plagueis, which is his master. And he says, Plagueis the Wise, he could even keep those whom he loves from dying. And he turns right to Anakin and says that right to his face. And he knows that's what Anakin wants to hear. And Anakin goes, is this power possible? And that's when Palpatine's like, okay, I got him. Let's hook him in. Not not from a Jedi. It's like, okay. It motivates him to betray Mace, because when Mace Windu is about to kill Palpatine, he screams out, "No, I need him," because he sees that he thinks that Palpatine is going to be the only way in which he's going to be able to save Padme's life. And then he wrecks Mace Windu's arm. That allows Palpatine to fry Mace and send him out the window, which some people say that's an awesome death. Other people say that's a very lame death for Mace, but whichever. He gets chucked out the window unceremoniously while frying, and meets some death maybe on the pavement. We don't know. And then Anakin, when he bows before Palpatine, he says, "Just help me save Padme. I can't live without her." Again, that fear of loss. I can't live without her. So when he goes and kills younglings, which are like the elementary age kids who are just trying to learn to be Jedi, yes, it's atrocious death, but he's done this before because he did that with the Sand People. He just uses the same dehumanization concept of they're not children. They're the enemy. Everyone who stands in my path is the enemy, even these kids. And so he butchers them. He kills all of them. He goes on and is like, I'm going to bring peace to the galaxy and everything, and helps end the Clone Wars by killing all the main leaders of the faction group, which is the CIS, Confederacy of Independent Systems. And then he's there on Mustafar, and then you come down to the confrontation where he's with Padme, and he's like, only my new powers will save you. But he's like, don't worry. And this is where you can see that he didn't really have true loyalty to Palpatine, because he even says the line, I can overthrow him. And then you and I, Padme, we can rule this galaxy together, make it everything we want it to be. And there's a great moment in the novelization of Episode 3 that it goes into a little bit more detail of this scene, which is that Palpatine already kind of told him earlier, as a means of laying the seeds of betrayal, he says, be careful, Padme may betray you as well. And he's like, that's not going to happen. But when he sees Padme there and he sees Obi-Wan on the ship, then he thinks back to that previous mention, and he's like, oh my gosh, he's right. She's betrayed me too, because she's brought Obi-Wan here to destroy me, which is why he screams liar at her face. Force chokes her, and then she's unconscious. This is why he thinks to himself that, I didn't kill her, until Palpatine says, oh no, in your anger you did. He's like, no, which is just a way for Palpatine to just have control over him. But that whole scene, what I was trying to say is that whole scene set up, is he goes on to say, like, I'm going to bring peace and freedom to my new empire. But no, you can see where he's at. And I bring all this up because I think the core point of why he saved Luke is what was the light side that remained in him was his love for Padme. Because deep down, if you think about it, his whole reason for doing everything is Padme. And even when she's dead, he still goes on and tries to bring order to the galaxy, because in his mindset, well, that's what Padme would have wanted probably. I'm going to bring about the world in which we used to talk about, but the way in which I think it needs to be done, that, people should not question, and that we will bring peace and order in this way, and we will no longer have the bickering of the Senate and all this other stuff that can mess things
which is
up.
what he grew up with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think he just was completely attached at that point, and so the only thing he had any connection to anymore was Palpatine, which is kind of why he did stick with him. And then he was stuck in that sort of like you had mentioned, kind of that manipulative relationship with Palpatine, because that's all he's kind of ever known. And I know, Nerdy Chap, you had mentioned earlier Ahsoka, and we kind of quickly past that, but yeah, that was again a sense of loss and betrayal, just fueled into Episode 3.
Yep.
And
because he sees that betrayal of the Jedi Order to him, because he's like, Ahsoka walked away from the Jedi Order because she felt betrayed, and now Anakin's still there, and he's like, he probably is questioning his own relationship to the Jedi Order in that moment, which I'm really excited to see the new season of Clone Wars come out, because I'm hoping they bridge that gap that leads us to the exact moment of the battle over Coruscant in Episode 3. Oh, that's going to make me giddy if they go there. I'm hoping. I'm hoping. It looks like they are.
Are you guys willing to really explore that in those moments, through what I was saying, him living a life of PTSD and abuse, in a sense, almost Munchausen syndrome. The abuse
PTSD, absolutely.
Come out of it, where it's, very difficult to separate from it. That in these moments that he's having, Palpatine being the master that he is, and quite aware of mental and emotional manipulation, is manipulating Anakin to be able to experience a psychotic break. And by implanting these memories and these thoughts in his mind, which he does, it's not like Anakin is from himself. They are there from Palpatine. In that psychotic break, he pushes the envelope of what's acceptable in order to achieve what he feels is the achievable, the power that's his right, because he says it's his right. You know that. And when he says that, you realize, oh gosh, this is a person who is psychotic, who has a level of schizoaffective disorder, because he's in a dissociative state. My brain sees everything like that. Sorry. So I'm like, okay. So in that moment, when he actually affects the death of Padme, that he has split. He's not Anakin. He is Vader at this moment. The being that Palpatine has been breathing and grooming to exist. And in that moment, he has that psychotic break and splits his personality. He is now two beings at one time. And in that moment, Vader takes the lead. Vader was always a possibility. It was always possible that Vader could become the entity that took the lead, but in those moments he did. And Palpatine was fueling that by manipulating his mind, and manipulating his memories and his emotions. So you kind of...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, what do you think about that thought?
I just, to me, that brings up seeing, so there's a lot of people who just straight up hey, Anakin, and say, okay, he's a bad guy, he's Vader, they're the same person, you can't separate them, and that's just that. It's just straight up, they don't actually see the depth.
Actually, Jody, real quick, they don't hate Anakin, they hate Hayden Christensen. They hate the acting. That's all.
I know, right? No, I've definitely had conversations with people where they're like, how do you see them as two different people? They're literally the same person. Anakin is a horrible person. And it's I see Anakin as that little kid that we saw at the beginning of episode 1. I see Vader as everything that Palpatine manipulated him into.
I always thought Anakin as the Jedi, the mentality of the Jedi, and then Darth Vader is the mentality of the Sith, and that's where.
So basically, you're all agreeing with me.
Yeah.
He was a multiple personality.
Oh yeah, 100%. But I mean, that's everybody. That's everybody. Yeah. And that's what makes this villain so amazing, is that you're able to kind of associate with him because he does have those humanistic traits. He's not just all evil like Darth Maul and all the other ones that we see on the screen. This character has redeeming qualities.
Even Darth Maul can be argued.
I mean, even Darth Maul gets redeemed in Clone Wars to some extent. I mean, you do have to look at that.
No, not Clone Wars, Rebels.
Rebels, I'm sorry. I haven't seen Rebels yet.
Rebels. Listen, you think that everyone has those qualities? Yes, everyone has multiple personalities. That's our existence. That's our life. But not everyone exists in a state of mental dissociation to where you exist within those personalities as part of who you are. So that's just to separate those two things, okay?
Yes, I agree.
This is a mental disorder. Yeah, so, but I do agree with what you're saying. We all have that tendency. Yeah, that's our life. That's called growing. That's called student identity.
what I was mentioning was, I mean, I'm sure there are people that definitely, hate on the actor himself, which I absolutely adore Hayden Christensen. I think he did an absolutely phenomenal job with what he was given to portray. But there are people who don't actually see the complexity of villains, and it's one thing to just love a villain because they're whatever, like a hot bad guy or something. But it's another thing to look at the complexity and the depth of a character and see that, okay, this is this whole conversation that we're having is something that a lot of people wouldn't actually even agree on. They would just be like point blank, nope, Anakin is Darth Vader. They're one and the same, and he's a bad person that it cannot be redeemed.
Yeah,
well,
I agree.
The thing I want to say is that I think what people were very upset about with Anakin is they wanted to see more of what we kind of saw in Clone Wars, which is when you first get that blurb of when Obi-Wan mentions to Luke about Luke's father, of oh, my father fought alongside you in the Clone Wars? Oh, yeah. Is that people had this idea that it was some kind of buddy cop thing. Anakin and Obi-Wan together, and then something happened to where Anakin turned to the dark side, which you kind of get more of that buddy cop kind of feel in the Clone Wars cartoon series, where you see the relationship of Anakin and Obi-Wan throughout that. A lot of people have gone when you watch the Clone Wars as compared to watching the movies, they're where was this Anakin? Because they go from the Hayden Christensen being told by Lucas to act more like the whiny Anakin, they're yeah, I can't. Nope, that's not Vader to me. To then when they see him a little bit more poised, I got this, Obi-Wan, stop, nagging me. They're yeah, where was this Anakin? So
I agree.
I think it goes against, and I think some of the complaints is based on what people's expectations of what they thought the story was supposed to be, and that's where they gripe.
Hayden, go ahead. Go. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off.
No. See, the same thing is I love Hayden as well.
Oh my God.
To me, I consider the definitive Vader as far as the people to meet the most that that have really shown you the most of Vader's character are, well, technically yes, Jake Lloyd for that one episode, but Hayden Christensen for the vast majority of the movies. Matt Lanter for the Clone Wars and Rebels cartoon series.
Heck yeah.
Oh, God, yes. David Prowse for being in the suit of Vader throughout the original trilogy, and James Earl Jones for being the awesome voice of Vader throughout the original trilogy. That is pretty much the definitive Vader. And yeah, I do want to also show some props, but the actor died a long time ago, so no one's going to be able to meet him at any Star Wars convention. But Sebastian Shaw, as the original Anakin Skywalker you get to see in Return of the Jedi, that they replaced with Hayden Christensen, which made people, the original cut of Return of the Jedi, very upset because they're where's my Sebastian Shaw? This is not cool. That is not what Anakin's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
So, those are your definitive. But to boil it down of who gives you the most body of work of the character, Hayden, Matt, David Prowse, and James Earl Jones. There's your definitive Vader as far as the ones who have portrayed him. They give you the biggest body of work.
But then if you think about it in terms of the actual physical also appearance, that would be Hayden.
Yeah. In fact, the whole look of Anakin in the Clone Wars series is based off the look of Anakin portrayed from the movies. So they had to go to make him be Anakin, we got to go by the way he looked in the movie. So they had to go by Hayden. Hayden was the reference point. Sorry, kids. But what I wanted to say is, the whole thing of, I can't talk about schizophrenia and dissociative disorder and stuff because I'm not fully a psychologist. I can't say 100%, oh yes, sure diagnosis. The idea of maybe a split personality, yes, the difference between Anakin and Vader, even though it's the same person, I can give you that. But to me, PTSD, I absolutely agree with, because he's had a lot of trauma happen to him. He's seen a lot, experienced a lot of betrayal, a lot of death, the loss of his mom. Those are some core things that all shaped Anakin into becoming Vader. Again, referencing the Clone Wars cartoon series, you also see his destiny with the Mortis episode, where there's the whole sequence that he sees himself as Darth Vader. You get this force vision thing of the mask, and you hear the breathing and all. So there's a lot. There's a whole body of work to be able to get into this. So for people who go like, I'm a Star Wars fan, but they only reference Empire Strikes Back, I'm like, dude, you need to watch all of it. And I mean all of it. That includes Clone Wars. That includes Rebels. You need to also read some of the books, because the books are amazing. I mean, if you read, I want to read, and I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I plan on reading Thrawn Alliance, which is Thrawn and Vader working together during the times of between episodes 3 and 4, because I'm like, oh, that's going to be fascinating. So you got that book. You have books like Tarkin that shows you Vader's relationship with Tarkin during the dark times, which is great. Again, the most recent, all the comic book coming out by Marvel that is expanding on what is considered the new timeline, even though Dark Horse had a lot, which is their Dark Horse stories are great. But even with the Marvel stories, why is Padme is pivotal, because in the most current story one right now, Vader is actually trying to find a way to open up the veil, get into the world beyond worlds to save Padme between episode 3 and 4 timeline. So you see how much you see how much Padme is an influence, which is why I think. And then there was also the Darth Vader comic that jumped up between episode 4 and 5, where Vader learns the name of the rebel pilot who blew up the Death Star, which is Skywalker. His first time learning that he has the possibility of having a son, and that Palpatine lied to him, which he shatters the glass of the Star Destroyer he's on because he's so ticked. But he keeps this knowledge secret from Palpatine initially, and tries to go on his own crusade to find Luke. Doesn't succeed, but you see that's what's going to lead him to episode 5 of like, join me, Luke, and we can rule the galaxy together as father and son. That same offer he gives to Padme of like, let's rule the galaxy together. He tries to give to Luke, and Luke rejects. Which then, when you get to that pivotal moment in Return of the Jedi, there is a great YouTube thing when I first found it that I'm like, okay, if you're going to special edition Star Wars, this should be kept. And what it was they showed the sequence of Luke being fried by Palpatine using his Force electricity power, and why he's being zapped like that. You see inside Vader's mind before he grabs Palpatine and throws him over in the reactor field. And in the mind, they showed these clips of sequences of him getting fried by Dooku, knowing what that feels like, seeing Mace Windu be fried by Palpatine, again, the memory of that, and then seeing Padme be force choked. So you can see these moments of his loss, his betrayal against the Jedi, the loss of Padme, to where he now, and then it goes back to seeing that line that Luke says, I am a Jedi like my father before me. And at the end of that, that's when you see Vader turn the head to Palpatine and it's like, yeah, you're gone. I'm chucking you. Because it's like, you are the last remnant I have left of Padme that I can see in front of me. If I let this punk kill you, it's like killing Padme all over again. And I know you've lied to me. I have seen the mistakes of my life. Not this time. Grab, chuck. I'm done with you. And that is what I consider as the core of the light side of Vader, is that technically you could say everything he's done is out of some weird, skewed version of his idea of love.
Yeah. And it's amazing how actually love takes different personifications in movies with villains, because a lot of the atrocities that we see in villain characters is in the name of love. They're doing it to save somebody or to help somebody or to do something in the name of love. And it's amazing how it does that, even in the Bible and even in holy scriptures, that's a main characteristic that drives villains or protagonists in stories since the beginning of time. And it's amazing that this story of Star Wars shows that personification that's been there since the beginning of time in such a way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that it's and here I'll go back to this again. Love is again something that's a matter of subjectivity, right? It's
right.
It's not hard and it's not fast, and it's always at the whim and the mercy of the person who's imagining and creating. So we have dark love, we have lust, we have greed that's attached to love things. So again, it's a spectrum, just like that cascade. And in this moment, his love for Padme is a love. So don't get me wrong. He truly does love her as a being. But he's also the connection and the attachment to who he can be with her, and having her as part of that is also something that he's so steadfastly holding on to. And in a sense, you could equate that to what he believes to be love. But really what it is it's a negative connection, right? It's a source of negative fuel versus positive fuel. So it's like there's a whole lot to go into that. But that's what the psyche does to you, right?
Yeah.
You will yourself into believing something, so therefore you create and manifest the manifesto that makes that truth, your truth, the truth. You see what I'm saying? So it's what he did. And in the moment when he snapped out of it, it's the love. Yeah, I think he has love in that moment for Luke. Luke becomes a being that he loves, because he realizes I can have this is a being that can love me and that I can love, and that this is redeeming, and I can be just Anakin in this moment. And it's not a truth that I have to manifest or create or manipulate. It's a truth. It's a truth. It's a true love. Is that kind of?
I was going to say, he answers to Luke of that line when he says, "Help me take this mask off." And then you see the real face of Vader, and he says, "Tell your sister you were right about me. Tell her you were right." That, and what was Luke right about? That he was still Anakin, that he was the good man all along, that there was that remnant of the light side within him that wasn't fully extinguished by Palpatine.
Yes.
And that's why you see his spirit at the end of the movie too. Why he joins the Jedis in the spirit, in the being able to manifest their spirits, which that's a new thing for the Jedis, and only a true Jedi could actually force themselves into existence as a ghost, quote unquote, like that. And I think that's super fascinating as well, that he was allowed to do that and able to do that because of the overwhelming love from Luke, and that final feeling of being himself, being Anakin. He is finally himself. He is free of all this.
Feeling accepted, because in that entire time, did he ever feel accepted?
No.
I think he felt a moment of pure absolute acceptance, and that's the absolution that Luke gives him, and that even Leia could have given him. There were moments when she was ready to do that to him, because according to Clone Wars and Rebels, she had realization before even Luke did. So I think that, God, we want to believe that everybody has a redeemable quality, right? So I always felt hope that was going to happen. Well, obviously we saw the first movies first, so hey, we knew it was going to happen. But it's such a testimony to the storytelling, Fred. It really is, that you can create entire theses, and hypotheses and postulations of mental health, mental awareness, and emotional fluidity based on this character. It's just, it's mind blowing.
Oh, and real quick, I wanted to bring up two things. One is when I talked about the failure aspect, that's also why you can see that Vader does not tolerate failure in any of his underlings, which is why he'll force choke you or kill you if he finds you useless in a heartbeat. That whole line, "You have failed me for the last time," stab. So that, because that may also be his own anger towards his own failure. So he cannot stand failure. Failure is not an option, and that is something that Palpatine drilled into him. The other thing is, just as a joke moment, is I do love How It Should Have Ended, to reference a great YouTube thing to watch for laughs, is they have the moment where Vader realizes that Luke has a twin sister, and he's like, and finds out that it's Leia, and he's like, whoa, hold on. Leia's your sister? He's like, stop right now. I'm dealing with a lot of heavy stuff. And he's actually, I think Robot Chicken may have done this or something, but he's like, yeah, Robot Chicken does this. He's like, Leia's his sister? Hold on. And then he goes goes to a card shop. Is like, how do I give a card of sorry for torturing you, daughter dearest, and blowing up your planet. Forgive me. And he's like, well, try the Ziggy card or something. He's like, yes, Ziggy. He's like, you had me at Ziggy. He knows how to say these things so well. But you got to think, how was Vader going? If Vader was able to be alive, continue beyond the Jedi, and actually talk to Leia, how does he smooth things over? Like, well, I'm sorry for torturing you with the bot and for blowing up your planet in front of your eyes. My bad. Didn't know.
Yeah, basically. I was just thinking that I know people were mad when Hayden Christensen replaced the original actor at the end of Return of the Jedi, but personally, I mean, granted, I grew up seeing Hayden Christensen as Anakin, but like to tie in what you had mentioned about his spirit being what it is was what led him to be able to even have that ability. Mm-hmm. I think it was more impactful and meaningful for it to have been Hayden Christensen, because that for us was the Anakin that we wanted to root for, that our hearts broke, for, in terms of seeing that Anakin become Darth Vader. And I'm glad that, like, personally, anytime I see him at the end, it makes me tear up and cry. I also can never watch episode 3. I watched it twice, once in the movies and once when it came out on the DVD, and I never watched it again after that because I can't. It literally breaks my heart.
Well, what if I show you the original version with Sebastian Shaw? Will that make you cry too? Okay.
Well, no, because I don't have that connection. So I'm saying, so it's like while we saw that as okay, that's what Anakin would look like. Even for original trilogy fans, I would think that when seeing Hayden Christensen, you have a point of connection to relate that back to, like, that was Anakin. Like, that was what was good about
I agree.
I was going to bring up, talking about connections. Remember, I started off by one of his first deaths that he witnessed is Qui-Gon on the funeral pyre. What is Vader's end? He's on the funeral pyre. It's one of those moments of Star Wars of where, of circle, like something way back in the beginning comes back and connects to the end. So even just the funeral pyre itself, of like Anakin was maybe avoiding that his entire life until, he was able to do that moment for Luke and everything, to sacrifice himself to save Luke. And then he ends up with having the Jedi funeral rites done for him.
Correct. So I want to wrap up. I know we've been running long, so I want to give everybody a moment to be able to give their final thoughts on Anakin and Darth Vader as a character, and what are your final thoughts on this? Let's start off with Nisha, and we'll go to Jody, and then Nerdy Chap after.
Oh, wow. Goodness gracious me. So I agree with Joe. The fact that they brought back Hayden and had him manifest as the enlightened and light being after the death made a lot of sense to me in that moment, because of the redeemability of the character and the person who played him through the most of the struggles. I felt that Anakin, that Matt and Hayden's representation of Anakin for me, as a mom, and as a mental health professional, I couldn't have been more understanding and aware of the struggle.
I think we lost Nisha.
Subjectively or objectively disconnect ourselves from the pain that we're suffering or the struggle that we're going through. And sometimes when we're lucky, we get a character like Vader, Anakin and Vader, who gives us a physical representation of that so that we can look at them and say, God, you know, I can connect to this being. I understand this being. And if there's redeemability in them, then dang it, maybe there's redeemability for me. Maybe there's hope for me. So I absolutely have never, and I've been watching from literally the first movie, guys. Remember, I was around in the beginning. Never have I ever not felt compassion and some connection to Vader, even when I didn't know who he was. You know what I'm saying? Because all I could see is that there was something hopeful about him, that there was possibility. And you know me, guys. You know I'm always going to try my best to find the positive and say that there's hope for people. And that, for me, is what we were given in this character. And I really, especially the Clone Wars and Rebels, I cannot tell you how much I absolutely adore this character. So, villain, but not as much as he was a mass murderer, in a sense, not as bad for me as maybe some other villains. So I love the character very much. Yeah.
How about you, Jody?
I mean, kind of what I had just said, honestly. I never really understood why I connected to Anakin growing up. I always, I never saw anything like wrong or bad about it until people were like, "You like Anakin? What? Like, he's so evil." And I'm like, it kind of made me feel really, really bad, because I was like, why do I connect to this character? And ultimately, it was because I connected to his share of loss and his want to be able to save people around him. And I think that it's very easy for people to not take the time to look into the depths and complexities of human beings. And while to an extent, definitely there are people that are just, well, Palpatines, we'll put it like that. You know, there are Palpatines in the world, but there are Anakins out there too. And I personally, like, I feel like I have encountered many people who have that struggle, you know, between that light and the dark, and have both of those within themselves. And Anakin, like, the world needed to see Anakin become Vader, because we needed to see that you can succumb to your darkness, and no matter how much you are overcome by that darkness, you still can come out of it.
I agree.
And I know that's something that Nerdy-chap kind of mentioned about when we've talked, like his biggest take from, say, the most recent trilogy, and that message of hope being the ultimate message of Star Wars. And I think Anakin, while depicting the darkest side of it, is ultimately a character that is meant to inspire hope.
I agree. And thank you so much, Jody. I appreciate that. That was a great insight of both you and Nisha, obviously. How about you, Nerdy-chap?
Well, first, I want to give a shout out to books, movies, and resources to anyone who wants to really explore the character of Vader. Because like I said, you got to look at all of it. As a fan of Vader, I anytime there's a new story about Vader, I'm like, oh, I must read this, or I must see this. So yes, mainly watch should be your watching. Episode 1, Episode 2, Clone Wars, the cartoon series from that was done by Dave Filoni. Then go into 3. Then watch Rebels. You can throw in Solo, a Star Wars movie, even though Vader isn't featured in there, but you know that's just timeline. Rebels, and then definitely Rogue One, because you got that great moment of Vader at the end, just butchering people left and right. For those people who just love Vader just wrecking things. And then watch the original trilogy, 4, 5, and 6. Then if you want some book sources to throw into the timeline, Marvel, like I said, Marvel Comics, current canon, Darth Vader comics, start reading those. Really gives you some in-depth aspects of the character. Also, as I mentioned, Thrawn Alliances is going to showcase the relationship between Anakin and Thrawn and Vader and Thrawn, because Thrawn knew Anakin during the time of the Clone Wars, according to the new timeline. Also, Tarkin, the book I mentioned. And anytime that there's any new Vader story, make sure you grab onto it. Other things to know about Vader is his suit. There has been stuff in a lot of like the Star Wars encyclopedia books that his suit actually keeps him not only alive, but in pain, which that pain he uses to channel the dark side. So he continues to suffer, but at the same time, the suit is a metaphor of him maybe even walling himself in from being affected by love, but being able to contain all that rage that's necessary for the dark side to flow through him. So there's that as a metaphor. But lastly, I want to say this, as far as on a personal note. The main reason why I got into Vader was because of my own dad. No, I'm not saying my dad is a mass murderer in any way, shape, or form. No. But growing up as a kid, my dad was known, his way of discipline was known as a lot of yelling and screaming and things. And for those of you who had kind of like more of the explosive temper kind of father, you know what I'm talking about. So growing up, when I saw Return of the Jedi and I saw how Luke saved his father, it left an impression on me that I thought to myself, I am one day going to save my dad. And what that meant to me as far as my faith goes, since I'm an ordained minister and all, it was helping my dad become fully realized as a Christian. Now, you may not consider that saving because of your own religious beliefs, but it was for me. Well, during the time of my dad's last years and everything, there was times where we had arguments and we made peace with each other. My dad did also get baptized in front of me and wanted me to witness that. And he was able to kind of give me a word of solace to me as kind of like the last conversation I had with him, that he was going to be okay kind of thing. And then he just abruptly died. But I could at least know that by taking the time to have those talks with my dad, confronting my dad, working through the past with my dad, and seeing him baptized and everything, that in a way I can say to myself, I did save my father. I walked the path of Luke. And even now, the spirit of my dad still influences me to whereas I make more peace with my relationship with my father, I'm able to make more peace with myself, of seeing the moments where I see that I have my own failures and flaws, that I am deep down like him, a good person, a flawed human being who tries to be good as best they possibly can. That was my dad, a flawed human being who tried to be good the best he could. And same goes for me, and same goes for I think anybody, is that we all are trying to be good people the best we can. We strive for that. And so that is the takeaway for me in Vader. So even seeing how Vader can be redeemed is also a good message to anyone, that to hold on to that good part of you, to help you find that sense of light, to be that good person. So hopefully you'll find your way.
That's awesome. Honestly, for me, Vader takes on there's one line in the series that really stuck with me with Vader, and it was when they said to him that he was the one to bring balance to the Force. And I see that, and then I see how he turned to the dark side. And you wonder about villains sometimes, and this is why I wanted to bring up this topic, was you wonder sometimes, are the villains wrong? And that's what makes a great villain, is where you question whether the villain, what they're doing, is wrong. And what would you do if you were in their place? And I think these series of films, they made that impact on me as a child. And I will say, I'll be the first person to say I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, but there's characters in Star Wars that I love to death because they are exactly what I would want to see in a film. And Vader is one of those. And because he's able to do that balancing force where he did make balance, he did bring balance, he brought balance to the universe. The universe was being overcome by this emperor, and then also it was being run by these Jedis, which all in all, they were corrupt. So what's better, this corrupt senator or this corrupt order? And wiping the slate clean and setting from the beginning and starting over again, I think that's one of the biggest impressions that I got from Darth Vader and the story of Star Wars, is that, and which I use every so many years, I clean slate and I start over and I learn from my previous mistakes, which I think that's what this villain does. He's learning from these previous mistakes. Obviously, he saw it at the end of his life, but he was able to witness and realize the mistakes that he made in his life. And to do what he did, that takes a lot of courage and a lot of conviction to be able to literally kill the person that is your father for the last 30 years. He is the father figure to him. And for him to finally be able to do that final murder because he's doing what he's doing to the one person where you identify love in, I think that's another attribute to him and justifies his behavior throughout the rest, because he actually does come full circle, like you guys said. He comes back to Anakin Skywalker at the end. And yeah, there's a lot of dark, but there's a lot of light as well. And I think that's an incredible message of hope and appreciation towards life in the end. So I want to thank you guys, honestly, for joining me on this episode. Nerdy-chap, you're able to check out all his things as well. We'll link everything on the show notes. And of course, diversely-geek, thank you, Joe and Nisha M., your geek mom, for joining us and giving us this psychological and intense aspect and giving us this in-depth review on Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker as a character. And again, everybody, you could check out everything that we do on manbitesfilm.com, and please check out all our social media accounts as well, and you'll be able to check us out on there. And watch for our new episodes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We'll be doing more in-depth reviews on villains and characters, just like you saw today.